I think the warrior one is a interesting one, specifically maybe more for someone my age too, like someone who's young who has to go out and make a name for himself, or who knows. But yeah, talk about this warrior archetype as well, and then the two subcategories, and
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. So the warrior archetype is one that's not it's not distinct to just the masculine. There are feminine images of the warrior, right? That there
Mm,
are you think about maybe Belle in Beauty and the Beast, who fights for the love that she has for the beast, right? Um, and of course, especially in the beginning of that story, he's not a healthy archetype, right? Um, but as in regards to the masculine archetype of the warrior in his fullness, we're talking about somebody who's strong, who's principled, who's skillful, who's loyal. So this is somebody who balances aggression with discipline. Okay, and they go to great lengths to accomplish goals, but at the same time, they're willing to even sacrifice themselves for some of those goals. And so especially in the masculine energy, that warrior energy, like if you look at any of the studies of like chimpanzee society, for
mm,
example, the posture of male chimpanzees is typically outward focused, whereas the female energy in chimpanzees is inward focused. So the females are focused on what life looks like, within the family unit and with the children and in the, inside the home, right? Um, and the masculine energy is focused outward, and it's directed toward protecting the family unit, providing for the family unit. And again, this is not to the exclusion of the females protecting, or the female providing. So a female archetype of that might be like the mama bear, for example, right? That everybody
hmm.
knows, you mess with my cubs, I'm going to rip you up, right? Um,
Yeah.
so again, this isn't an either or conversation, but the masculine warrior, like when I talk to guys, like one of the
Mm,
things, they'll come in my office and I'll be doing couples counseling or something, and this guy's sitting over there and he's all like dejected, and I can tell he's like down, and his wife is just railing on him for something, and it's clear he doesn't have any clue how to interact with the complexities of the relationship that she needs, right? But when I say to him, well, let me ask you a question, right?
mm.
If there was a bad guy breaking into your house, what would you do? And immediately you see his body posture, like he rises up and he goes, I'd kill him, right? And I go, oh really? Even if he was going to kill you? He's like, yeah. And I say, well, why is that? Like you'd go after him, right? Absolutely. Nobody's going to touch my wife, right? And then I'll say to them a lot of times, okay, so what I need from you right now is I need you to fight from your wife, but for your wife, but the enemy's not external, it's internal, and it's your own shadow. And you need to tap into that warrior so that you can protect her from your own shadow and from the things that threaten, maybe externally, but from within the family and from within your own rage even. And that's where the shadow parts come in when we're talking about the warrior.
Yeah. I've heard some people talk about how, like, trying to integrate the shadow, like there might be a negative side of a warrior, maybe a ruthless side of it, but it's like if you're able to integrate that darkness into you but have it under control, you might actually be more dangerous in a good way, not like reckless and destructive, but more, okay, I've integrated this little bit of danger that I have, and but now I can use it in precise times and I have it under control. And it's like I see that Peterson talking about that. I see that all the time from, I guess, people I listen to, where it's like, what do women like? Do women like a guy who can't do, who has almost no dangerousness to him? Or do they like women who have danger but have it under control and are controllable or are civilized at the same time? And that's a great point. Like, how are you going to emotionally support your woman if you are if you're incapable of managing your own rage or your own destructive tendencies? It's like you're not going to be very good at emotionally supporting from what I could tell. But yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah. And I think it really goes to the point that living out that positive warrior archetype in his fullness, and that's true for all of these positive archetypes, is incredibly difficult, right? That there is no virtue in being weak. There's no virtue in being passive, right? And I think that's where, so with the warrior, when you go to the passive side, that's what Moore and Gillette call the masochist, and that's the idea that it's this guy who's a pushover, but he's also a martyr. He's blaming. He has poor boundaries. He's kind of defined by failure, and so he might project the warrior energy, but he projects it on other people, and then he's constantly complaining about how they hurt him, and he's the victim, and he's powerless, and how he's experiencing this abuse from everybody else, but secretly he enjoys having that pain that is being inflicted on him because it draws attention to himself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's like the victim kind of mindset of, oh, poor me, life is so hard for me, pity party this. It's just kind of like, yeah, I don't think women find that attractive, and I think, yeah, that it probably is like a toxic way to be a man in some ways. Like, what woman is going to want to be around a guy who's pity party, I feel so bad for me? It's like, no, that just doesn't seem attractive even as a guy, but yeah, keep going.
Yeah, and we know those guys, right? I mean, and sadly, the polar opposite of the masochist, the polar opposite is the sadist, and that's the active pole of the toxic side. And that we know that guy too, right? Because he's cruel. He despises weakness. And instead of being the warrior who fights for the weak and protects the weak, he's the one that exploits them and he dominates them. And he's the typical workaholic, right? He's stepping on other people, he's dominating other people to get to the top, and basically, he's putting other people down out of his own sense of fear and self-loathing. And his idea is, I've got to destroy you because if I don't, you're going to destroy me.
Kind of that zero sum again.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, I think if you think about the traditional sadist, right? You might think of the biblical story of Pharaoh, who's threatened by Moses coming in and saying to free the people of Egypt, right? You think of Hitler for sure, right? Was a sadist who's threatened by other people's power, and if you think of the masochist, right, the passive pole, I mean, how many politicians do we see these days that are, fawning and, very, oh yeah, they're saying exactly what the other person wants to hear, but there's no strength in who they are, and they might be fighting for something, but it's so passive aggressive and behind the scenes that it just, you kind of know at the beginning, like it just makes your skin crawl.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, it almost takes courage, which might be a characteristic of a warrior, to say things that are true, that are genuine, that are, well, that might offend someone, or like, but there's like a balance. You don't want to be like the masochist who's just like shielding the truth so much and being very deceptive, or the other side, which might be the sadist who's like using truth as a weapon all the time. Like, you're terrible and you're fat and I'm going to destroy, or I don't know, whatever. But like, there's a nice line of like where to use truth, how to use it. I feel like a warrior might use the truth when necessary, or in a humble, loving way, like Jesus might have, or who knows. Like, these are all just examples of good examples of how to be a warrior, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, think of the Robin Hood energy, right? Here's this guy who is incredibly proficient with in his ability to fight, and then he uses it to protect the weak and to provide for those who can't provide for themselves, right? That's the quintessential warrior energy in its healthiness. Whereas maybe Prince John would be the sadist. Actually, he would probably be the masochist, right? He's the very weak, whining, sniveling, kind of epitome of that passive pole. Whereas the sheriff of Nottingham is the sadist. He's the active, cruel, abusive pole of this healthy archetype.
Sure. Yeah. I was just thinking, like, some people might be listening to this and say, why are they talking about archetypes? Aren't archetypes like existing only in stories? Why are we talking about stories? Like, it's so like the reason that we are so attracted to stories is because our life is a story. We have to live out some kind of life, and whatever life you choose to live out, that's going to be what people tell the story to their kids. Oh, Harley was like that, he did that, or, these are the choices we can make. It's like, do you want to be this example or that? And like, that's why I like talking about this. It's just a little tangent, but it's like, it's so relevant, even if in our culture, some stories like biblical stories are kind of just thrown away. Like, oh, that's just old news. We don't need that anymore. And I'm like, I don't think you're realizing how deep these stories go and how evolutionarily we've always needed stories. And yeah, it's just a little tangent of me kind of defending like why I feel like this is just a crucial topic for really anyone to listen to. But yeah, keep going.
Yeah. And it brings up this idea, like when you think about the characteristics that you're working on, right? Are you putting a primary focus on resume virtues or eulogy virtues? In other words,
what's eulogy? Is that like death, like
yeah,
obituary?
right. So if you go to a funeral, right, and they're reading your eulogy there, they're going to say a different set of things than you've got on your resume, right? And so these things we're talking right now are the virtues that I want people to say that I lived out that healthy king energy, right? That I lived out that healthy warrior energy, that I fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves, that I stood for the weak, right? And that I ran, the things I was in charge of, my kingdom well. Those are eulogy virtues, things that I'll be remembered for. Whereas the resume virtues might be, my skills as a therapist or some training I got last week, right? But all of those things, those are good, and we have to we have to pursue those. But ultimately, right, what we want to be pursuing are those eulogy virtues that are the highest virtues, that are the things that are going to impact people the most, and they're the things we're going to be remembered for and pass on to future generations.
Yeah, totally. He was a great father, a great brother, a great husband, a man in the community. You could always trust him. Versus he made a lot of money and didn't really have any friends.